Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots of big stories breaking this morning that we want to get to. Developments in Ukraine, potential, maybe, negotiations over a peace deal, some possibly hopeful signs, but I would very much moderate your expectations there. Also, Biden trying to clean things up and probably just making things worse. We also got a new budget from him, heavy on military spending, very different trajectory than the beginning of the administration. We'll talk about all of that. Latest signs that we may be headed into a recession, a key indicator that always precedes recessions in the last 50 years, has now indicated that we may be headed in that direction. So we'll break all of that down. Hunter Biden, new details revealed about potential criminal problems for him. That, of course, is being completely ignored by most of the media. We will break all of that down for you. And we can't resist but to bring you the absolutely best/worst takes of the whole Will Smith situation.
We've done a little roundup for everybody.
There was some amazing, really world-class galaxy brain unfolding over on Twitter.
There you people wouldn't believe.
Yeah. So we brought them all together for you to enjoy this morning. Also, Kyle Kondik is going to be back with us to preview the midterms, but we wanted to start with Biden and his cleanup job.
That's right. So we brought you those 3 instances yesterday where the president's comments had to be cleaned up. Number one, whenever he told troops or intimated to them that they might be heading towards Ukraine. Number 2, obviously, whenever he declared regime change or policy of regime change of the United States for Vladimir Putin. And then a third instance where he also had a gaffe that had to be cleaned up by the White House. Yet the president yesterday is defiant. He says, I didn't make a single mistake. You people are the one who are misinterpreting it. He's got a little bit in common with Trump in that regard. Yeah. Let's take a listen.
Do you believe what you said, that Putin can't remain in power? Or do you now regret saying that because your government has been trying to walk that back? Did your words complicate matters?
Well, you asked 3 different questions. I'll answer them all. Number 1, I'm not walking anything back. The fact of the matter is I was expressing the moral outrage I felt toward the way Putin is dealing in the actions of this man. Just brutality. Half the children in Ukraine. I just come from being with those families. And so, but I want to make it clear, I wasn't then, nor am I now, articulating a policy change. I was expressing the moral outrage that I feel, and I make no apologies for it. Personal feelings? My personal feelings. Secondly,
remain in power does not mean regime change. What does it mean?
It means that I would hope it was expressing my outrage. He shouldn't remain in power. Just like, bad people shouldn't continue to do bad things. But it doesn't mean we have a fundamental policy to do anything to take Putin down in any way.
What
Are you worried that other leaders in the world are going to start to doubt that America is back if some of these big things that you say on the world stage keep getting walked back?
What's getting walked back?
It made it sound like, just in the last couple of days, it sounded like you told U.S. troops they were going to Ukraine. It sounded like you said it was possible the U.S. would use a chemical weapon, and it sounded like you were calling for regime change in Russia, and we know...
None of the 3 occurred.
None of the 3 occurred?
None of the 3.
So, yeah, there you could see. None of the 3 were a walk back. There was no problem, even though his administration had to clean up every single one with a clarifying statement after the fact, Krystal. I think that mashup that we just had there is extraordinary because it shows you that this man has no contrition for what he said, that the White House staff are jumping the gun a little bit whenever they try to put out these statements clarifying things for him, and it creates a narrative he clearly doesn't like. He's like, no, I didn't make a mistake. I didn't misspeak whatsoever. I said exactly what I mean. And this is part of the issue. During that conference, he said, I was not changing the policy of the United States. What you say is the policy of the United States. Yeah. When you declare regime change, that means that's the policy of the United States government. We used to have the same problem under Trump. His advisors would say, well, if you look at the underlying policy, it's like, no. That's not how it works. He's the democratically elected one. Whenever he speaks, he is declaring something, part of why what he said yesterday was so catastrophic in terms of its implications for the Russian government itself. But it just shows you that this man, is completely, he just has no apologies. He has no ability for him to even clarify his words, even if you can recognize the extraordinary danger that he's putting us in by speaking off the cuff like this.
Joe Biden has always been completely undisciplined when it comes to his language and his words. This is a surprise to absolutely no one. And sometimes that trait is actually charming because sometimes it makes him relatable. You know, I mean, it's part of, frankly, what people liked about Trump too. Sometimes they liked that he would say the thing that he's not really supposed to say. And it's just like, what happens to fumble into his brain at that moment and then fall right out of his mouth? It can be an appealing characteristic. When you are talking about a potential World War III confrontation with a nuclear superpower, it is the most disastrous character trait you could possibly have. And that's why we've had, over the past just very short period of time, he, off the cuff, calls Putin a war criminal. Now, was that planned in advance or not? We don't know. After the fact, then they come out with a sort of like rollout of, okay, now the US government is going to officially call Putin a war criminal, which, look, he is. But when you have the president of the United States and the official policy of the U.S. administration to label him a war criminal, that makes it very difficult to be a positive, constructive part of forging a peace. So first you have that. You have him call him a butcher, something else that, you know, allies distanced themselves from and the White House had to clean up. Then you have him seeming to insinuate to our armed forces that they're going to be actually going to Ukraine. Okay, disastrous for anyone to get the idea that he's like letting slip there what's actually going on. And then you, of course, have him ad-libbing this line from his speech that Putin cannot remain in power, validating the worst fears of Putin, effectively pushing him even further into a corner and making the risk of escalation that much greater. And then, and I didn't catch this till after the fact, after this presser yesterday, when he was responding to a question about what he said to the 82nd Airborne and seeming to imply that they were going to be actually going to Ukraine, he made another mess for himself. He denied that that was what was going on, that they were actually going to Ukraine, adding, we're talking about helping train the Ukrainian troops that are in Poland.
Got it.
Well, that hasn't been acknowledged, and that represents, if true, and by the way, he reiterated it when pressed. He said, I was referring to being with and talking with the Ukrainian troops that are in Poland. We have not acknowledged that our troops are training Ukrainian troops in Poland. And if that is in fact true, number one, that is classified. And number two, that is a significant escalation that, again, nobody has been made aware of. So even in his cleanup, he's making another catastrophic mess for him. And I would love to know the answer of whether or not that is actually happening right now.
That's a great question as well. I have no doubt that it is happening. But as you said, you know, these things are either classified or they should be briefed to Congress, and we should all maybe have a little bit of a say or understanding about what's happening. And this just comes within the general context of all of the arms that are flowing into Ukraine, the very lack of current oversight and the lack of inquiry currently by the press. This is really what astounds me about Biden, which is that any rational person, anyone, could look at what he said and say, this is a real problem. I mean, some people are trying to excuse it away. We covered all the bloodthirsty neocons in media yesterday saying, oh, actually, regime change is good. I mean, outside of these psychopaths, most people could say this. Yeah, I think Putin should go. I absolutely think that. Do I think that we should bring force to bear in order to accomplish that goal? No, I don't think that. This was exactly the same position that was the elites used in order to gaslight us into war in Iraq. They made it a referendum on Saddam Hussein, not on Saddam Hussein and then removal of Saddam Hussein and all of the 40th order consequences that could come with that. I mean, look at the dissolution of Russian regimes in the past. Doesn't always go so well for the rest of the world. And I think that that is exactly why what he said is so consequential. Even on CNN, I saw an analyst yesterday, her name is Kim Dozier, national security reporter. She's like, look, this is the greatest gift to Kremlin propaganda that could have ever happened.
That's right.
Everyone can understand that in terms of what the Russian people are hearing domestically, being hammered home that these sanctions are going to come no matter what. They want to overthrow our government. They want to return to the chaos of the 1990s. They refuse in order to back down. And thus the Ukrainian, peacekeeping operation or whatever they call it is what is needed at this time. Again and again, we see this from Biden. He validates the concerns, but worse on a strategic perspective, he's all over the map. He's like, no, we're not going to send any troops, but we are sending these advisors. Also, the policy is regime change, except it's not regime change. I was expecting my moral outrage. And also the troops are going over there, but they're not going over there. What the hell is happening? Uncertainty in these environments is exactly what causes miscalculation and escalation. Lack of ability to understand what your opponent is thinking. In the Kremlin, they have already the lens of the most maximalist interpretation of what the Biden administration is saying, which could lead them to take the most maximalist action, which could then cause a miscalculation on our part. And next thing you know, we're in a minor nuclear exchange, and there's nothing minor about what that looks like in this day and age.
Well, and it's not just that this is like verbal diarrhea. The problem is that he is probably revealing here the true thinking inside the administration.
Well, that's even worse, right?
Which is even worse. Yeah. This isn't just he slipped up and, said the wrong thing. Yeah. No, it's a gaffe in the true sense in that he revealed the discussions that are actually going on behind the scenes that we had gotten little glimpses of before. I keep mentioning, but it's really important, that Niall Ferguson piece where he reports that privately, a senior administration official was saying the only end game here is Putin out of power. You had Michael O'Hanlon, who's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He said of Biden's comment, what it tells me and worries me is that the top team is not thinking about plausible war termination. Now, I'm not talking about, the type of hot war we had in Iraq where we brought in the tanks and we, using military force to pose Saddam Hussein. But if they are deluding themselves into thinking that their actions are going to, in the near term, push Putin out of power, and that is the only endgame that they are ultimately pushing for, well, that means that they aren't going to be a constructive part of trying to create an off-ramp, trying to create the conditions for peace, pushing for negotiations which are going to be difficult and painful on both sides. What Biden seems to be indicating here is that they are thinking instead that the pressure they're bringing to bear, the extreme pressure through indiscriminate sanctions and through bolstering the Ukrainian military and by making Russia a global pariah, that is actually going to have the end effect of pushing Putin out of power. The reality is their comments here and their actions thus far are likely only strengthening Putin's hand domestically, providing him with propaganda wins, as you said, validating the narrative that he has been selling to his people that the West is out to get Russia, they want to destroy Russia, they hate Russia, and we are simply providing fuel for that fire. So it's not just that this is a verbal screw-up, it's that the direction and the thinking of the administration that it reveals is a catastrophic direction.
Yeah, but not everybody in the press corps was willing to acknowledge it that way. Just look at the way this PBS reporter talks to Biden. You can't even make it up. Let's take a listen.
You have more foreign policy experience than any president who's ever held this office. Whether those are your personal feelings or your feelings as president, you understand why people would believe you, as someone commanding one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, saying someone cannot remain in power is a statement of U.S. policy. And also, are you concerned about propaganda use of those remarks by the Russians?
No and no.
Tell me why. You have so much experience. You are the leader of this country.
Because it's ridiculous. Nobody believes we're going to take down. I was talking about taking down Putin. Nobody believes that. Number one. Number two, what have I been talking about since this all began? The only war that's worse than one intended is one that's unintended. The last thing I want to do is engage in a land war or a nuclear war with Russia. That's not part of it.
So even after buttering him up, you have so much more.
Oh my God, you're
First
so
of all,
amazing.
That's not true.
You're like the
He
best
did not have the
president
most.
ever.
Does not have the most foreign policy experience of any president. John Quincy Adams would like a word whenever it comes to that, and George H.W. Bush and many of these others for that.
Experience
Nixon,
in foreign policy,
Yes.
not necessarily
not
a
necessarily
good thing here, folks.
I'm just listening off people who have much more foreign policy experience than he did before he took the office. And yet, this is the issue, which is that even within that, he is such a crotchety old guy that he had not retreat. Nobody believes. Actually, a lot of people believe it. And you should know that if you actually did have, proper foreign policy experience. But this ornery nature of Biden, this is not an old man thing. This is intrinsic to his character, has been for the last 50 years. When he believes he's right, he refuses to back down. We saw this during the campaign. We see it here now. And look, this is a very unfortunate part of his character that makes him the leader of the democratic free world a real issue for all of us because of the global security concerns he's igniting, and he refuses to even acknowledge a single part of that. It's making us all less safe.
our friend David Rothkopf, who was
yes.
featured
Yeah, what did he say?
yesterday as
Right.
being one of the most aggressive sort of people out there,
Right.
mainstream foreign policy types, who is running cover for Biden on these comments. Who's very upset about the number of questions that were about whether regime change was the policy of the United States, because I think 7 out of 9 of the questions had to do with this.
Yes.
I would say this is one instance where, the media fixates on it as like, oh, it's a gaffe and it's a mistake. One instance where that lines up with what is actually the central, most critical issue of the day, which is what is the administration actually thinking? Now, of course, they never really press the case. I think the only question we've really seen that pushes, okay, what are you doing to create a peace, came from Ryan Grimm. At one instance, they never really pressed the case of like, how are you creating an off-ramp? How are you making it so that negotiations will come to a peaceful resolution? But in this one case, their instinct for like gotcha questions actually lands on what is the most central and critical issue of the day. And it's not that he misspoke. It's the fear that this reveals what is really going on inside high levels of the administration.
Yeah, unfortunately, that may be the case. Hey guys, we're going to be totally upfront with you. This is the most perilous time that we have ever operated in.
It is so difficult just to try to sort through the news, but even more importantly, to bring you accurate information as this wave of lockdown and censorship spreads across the nation.
Yeah, look, if you can become a premium subscriber today at breakingpoints.com, you're going to help us build out a vibrant, independent media ecosystem, which is free of mainstream pressure. We can't tell you how important that is at a time like this.
Yep, that's right. Go to breakingpoints.com to subscribe. We love you guys and we appreciate you so much.